The moment he grabbed her jaw and forced the room to see the bruise, every laugh died, every fork froze midair, and that's when the men in the back booth realized they'd made a fatal mistake. No shouting, no threats, just one calm sentence that turned the diner into a graveyard of silence. And what he did next didn't end that night. It followed them home. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. They say you can tell a lot about a person by the way they treat those who serve them. Late-night diners are places where suffering hides in plain sight. Exhausted smiles masking deeper wounds. Fear folded neatly beneath uniforms and forced pleasantries. Pain swallowed between coffee refills and whispered thank yous. For most customers, it's easier to look away, to leave a tip and pretend everything's fine. But not for him. That night, Emilio Rojas sat in booth 7 and noticed what everyone else had trained themselves to ignore: the faint purple shadow beneath Martha's eye, and the way her entire body tensed whenever she approached the back corner table. No one said a word, but the stillness in his gaze said everything. Someone was about to learn that silence doesn't always mean safety. Late-night diners have a kind of silence that lives beneath the clatter of dishes and the hum of fluorescent lights. They're sanctuaries for people who have nowhere else to go, where the world slows to a crawl, where the desperate come to breathe, to think, to disappear for an hour or two. It's where broken souls meet under flickering neon signs, where coffee poured at 2 a.m. becomes an act of quiet mercy. For Martha Gidney, this diner wasn't just a workplace. It was a trap disguised as survival. The old Open 24 HRS sign buzzed faintly as she tied her apron for another graveyard shift. Her dark hair, slightly disheveled from the wind outside, fell across her face as she adjusted her collar. The waitress uniform, a pale tan dress with black piping along the collar and short sleeves, had seen better days. Stains that wouldn't quite wash out. A small tear near the hem she'd sewn back together 3 times. But it was clean, pressed, and the only thing standing between her and complete financial collapse. Her hands moved through the routine, mechanically smoothing the fabric, checking her reflection in the stainless steel coffee pot behind the counter. When she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, her sleeve shifted, revealing the faint yellow-purple edge of a bruise along her forearm. She quickly pulled the fabric back down, her movements sharp, practiced. A glance around the empty dining room confirmed no one had noticed. The manager had been clear 3 months ago when she'd shown up with a split lip. Whatever's happening at home stays at home. This is a business, not a therapy session. Customers don't want to see that. So she learned to hide it. The ache, the fear, the careful calculations she made every time she walked past certain tables, certain men, certain voices that carried too much confidence. It was just after midnight when the regulars began filtering in. 2 truckers, one bald, one with a graying beard, claimed their usual window booth, spreading maps across the table between them. They were harmless, quiet. They'd order the same thing they always did: eggs over easy, bacon, wheat toast, black coffee. They'd leave a decent tip and be gone by 1:30. A college kid in a wrinkled hoodie slouched into the corner booth, dumping an overloaded backpack onto the seat beside him. Textbooks spilled out. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion or tears or both. He'd nurse a single cup of coffee for 3 hours while highlighting sentences that probably didn't matter anymore. And then there was the back booth, the one near the restrooms, tucked into the shadows where the overhead lights didn't quite reach. 3 men sat there, sprawled across the cracked red vinyl like they owned it. The biggest one, thick-necked, tattooed forearms, cruel smile, always ordered the most food and ate the least. The one beside him, wiry and fidgety, laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny. The third man, older, with slicked back hair and a gold watch that caught the light, never looked at Martha's face, only her body, only the parts of her he felt entitled to evaluate. They'd been coming in for weeks now, and every night, their behavior got bolder. Martha had learned to approach their table last, to keep her answers short, to never bend down to wipe their table if she could avoid it. She'd learned that laughing at their comments made them escalate, ignoring them made them angry. There was no right response, only degrees of wrong, so she survived in the narrow space between. The door chimed. Everyone looked up instinctively. Truckers, college kid, even the men in the back booth. It was a reflex in places like this. You always checked who was walking through the door after midnight. The man who entered moved like he'd already assessed every exit before stepping inside. Dark suit jacket, perfectly tailored, worn over a black shirt with no tie. His hair was dark and neatly combed back, revealing a face that could have been handsome if it weren't so severe. But what made people's eyes linger, what made the room feel suddenly smaller, were the tattoos that crawled up the left side of his neck. Not the sloppy kind, the kind that told stories, the kind that had been earned. Emilio Rojas didn't look around like someone trying to find a seat. He chose booth 7, center of the room, back to the wall, clear sightlines to every table and both exits, and sat down with the calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. Martha grabbed a coffee pot and a menu, forcing her professional smile into place. Her ribs still ached from 2 nights ago. The bruise beneath her left eye had faded to a dull purple yellow, but under the diner's harsh fluorescent lights, it was impossible to miss. She approached booth 7, notepad ready. "Coffee?" she asked, keeping her voice light, neutral. Emilio looked up, and that's when everything shifted. He didn't glance at her bruise the way most people did, a quick, uncomfortable flicker before looking away. He didn't pretend not to see it. He didn't offer false sympathy or ask intrusive questions. He simply looked at it, then at her eyes, then back at the bruise. A deliberate, unflinching acknowledgement that someone had hurt her and that he had seen it. Martha's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the coffee pot handle. "Coffee's fine," Emilio said quietly. His voice was low, measured, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. She poured, her hand trembling just slightly. A drop splashed onto the saucer. She set the pot down, pulling out her notepad to take his order, but before she could speak, his hand moved, not toward her, toward the edge of the table. His fingers, adorned with a single silver ring, tapped twice against the laminate surface. A small gesture. Almost nothing, but his eyes never left hers. "Take your time," he said. It wasn't kindness in his voice. It was something else. Something that felt like a promise she didn't understand yet. Martha nodded, retreating to the counter, her pulse hammering in her throat. She didn't know who Emilio Rojas was. She didn't know what he did, where he came from, or why he'd walked into this rundown diner on this particular night. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had seen her, really seen her, and somehow, that was more terrifying than anything the men in the back booth had ever done. Emilio Rojas had learned long ago that most people revealed themselves in the first 5 minutes. The way they carried their shoulders, the rhythm of their breathing, the micro-expressions that flashed across their faces before they remembered to hide them. He'd built an empire on that knowledge. Sitting in booth 7, he didn't need to look directly at Martha to track her movements. Peripheral vision told him enough. The way she favored her left side when she walked, the slight hitch in her breath when the men in the back booth called out to her, the practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. He'd seen 1,000 versions of this story. Different cities, different faces, same ending, unless someone interrupted the pattern. Emilio lifted his coffee cup, taking a slow sip while his eyes swept the diner with methodical precision. The truckers were harmless working men too tired for trouble. The college kid was drowning in his own problems, oblivious to everything beyond his textbooks. The cook in the back, visible through the kitchen window, moved with the exhausted efficiency of someone who'd stopped caring years ago. Then there were the 3 men. The big one, crew-cut, neck like a tree trunk, sat with his legs spread wide, taking up more space than necessary. Alpha posture. The kind of man who'd never been told no and wouldn't recognize the word if he heard it. The wiry one beside him couldn't sit still, drumming fingers, bouncing knee. Eyes that darted around the room looking for reactions to his friend's jokes. A follower, dangerous only in groups. The older one, expensive watch, slicked hair, manicured hands, was the Jinjun problem. He had the stillness of someone who'd orchestrated violence without ever dirtying his own hands. The way he looked at Martha wasn't lust. It was ownership. Like she was property he'd already purchased, just waiting for delivery. Emilio had dealt with men like this before. They usually ended up regretting their certainty. Martha passed by his table carrying plates for the truckers. She moved like someone navigating a minefield, each step carefully calculated to avoid triggering an explosion. When she set down the food, her sleeve rode up slightly, revealing another bruise on her wrist, this one darker, fresher. Emilio's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "More coffee?" Martha asked, appearing at his table with the pot. She kept her distance, hovering just outside arm's reach, a barrier she'd learned to maintain. "Please." As she poured, Emilio noticed her hands, small scars across her knuckles, burns on her fingers from handling hot plates. Working hands. hands that had never stopped moving long enough to heal properly. "You work every night?" he asked quietly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. Most customers didn't ask. They ordered, ate, paid, left. They certainly didn't notice her beyond the function she served. "Most nights," Martha said carefully, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Can I get you anything else? What time do you finish?" Martha's entire body went rigid. Her eyes flicked toward the door, calculating distances, escape routes. This was the moment men usually revealed their intentions. This was when the friendly questions turned into demands. "I'm sorry, I'm not asking for me," Emilio interrupted, his voice still low, still calm. "I'm asking how long you have to stay here with them." He didn't gesture toward the back booth. Didn't need to. Martha's professional smile cracked for just a second. Beneath it, Emilio saw exhaustion, fear, and something else, a flicker of desperate hope that someone, anyone, had finally noticed the truth she'd been screaming silently for months. I close at 6 a.m., she whispered. 6 hours. 6 more hours of walking past that table, enduring their comments, their looks, their hands that brushed against her accidentally, every chance they got. "You okay, sweetheart?" The shout came from the back booth. The big one, grinning like a predator who'd spotted wounded prey. "You're spending an awful lot of time over there. Don't want us to get jealous." His friends laughed. The sound was ugly, performative, designed to establish dominance. Martha's face flushed. "I'll be right there," she called back, her voice steady despite the tremor Emilio could see running through her shoulders. She turned to leave, but Emilio's voice stopped her. "Martha." She froze. He'd read her name tag, but hearing it spoken aloud with respect, with recognition of her as a person rather than a function, made something in her chest tighten painfully. "You didn't do anything wrong," Emilio said quietly. "Remember that." Martha didn't respond. Couldn't. She just nodded once, quickly, before hurrying away. Emilio watched her go, then shifted his attention fully to the back booth. The 3 men had noticed his interest. The big one was staring at him now, sizing him up, trying to decide if Emilio was a threat or just another customer who'd look away like everyone else. Emilio didn't look away. He held the man's gaze with the kind of stillness that made people deeply uncomfortable. No aggression, no challenge, just presence. The kind of presence that said, "I see exactly what you are, and I'm not impressed." The big man's smile faltered. He shifted in his seat, unsure how to respond to someone who refused to play by the usual social rules. "You got a problem?" he called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the diner. The truckers looked up. The college kid's head swiveled. Even the cook glanced out from the kitchen. Emilio took another sip of coffee, set the cup down with deliberate care. "Not yet," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the diner like a blade. "Do you?" The temperature in the room dropped. The older man in the expensive watch leaned forward, placing a calming hand on his friend's arm. He'd recognized something the others hadn't. The tattoos on Emilio's neck weren't decorative. The suit wasn't off the rack. The control in every movement wasn't accidental. "We're good," the older man said smoothly. "Just making conversation." "Good," Emilio replied. "Keep it civil." It wasn't a request. The older man's eyes narrowed, but he nodded slowly. Understanding had passed between them. A recognition of power, of consequence. For now, they'd behave, but Emilio knew their type. Restraint wasn't in their nature. It was only a matter of time before they escalated. When they did, he'd be ready. Martha reappeared with his food, eggs, bacon, wheat toast. She set it down quickly, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you," Emilio said. She nodded and hurried away, but not before Emilio saw something shift in her expression, a tiny crack in the armor she'd built around herself. Someone had noticed. Someone had stood up. Someone had made the men in the back booth back down, even temporarily. For Martha, that small moment of protection was more than she'd received in months. For Emilio, it was only the beginning. He'd learned to read rooms, to identify predators and prey, to know when violence was inevitable and when it could be postponed. But he'd also learned something else, that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was watch and wait, because restraint, when finally broken, becomes absolute. The 3 men in the back booth had a routine. They always arrived around 12:30, after the dinner rush but before the real degenerates stumbled in. They always sat in the same spot, the corner booth where the lighting was dimmest and the manager's office camera angle didn't quite reach. They always ordered enough food to justify taking up space for hours, but they never actually came for the food. They came for the power. Tonight was no different. "Hey, sweetheart." The big one, his name was Kyle. Though Martha had never asked, snapped his fingers like he was summoning a dog. "We're ready to order. That is, if you're done flirting with Suit Boy over there." His friends laughed on cue. The wiry one, Tommy, slapped the table for emphasis, making the silverware jump. Martha approached with her notepad, keeping her face carefully neutral. "What can I get you?" "What can you get me?" Kyle repeated, grinning at his friends like he'd just heard the world's greatest setup. "How much time you got, honey?" More laughter, louder this time. Martha's pen hovered over the notepad. She'd learned not to respond to these comments. Laughing encouraged them. Silence enraged them. She existed in the narrow space between a polite smile, a patient pause, waiting for them to tire themselves out. "The usual?" she asked, her voice professionally pleasant despite the tightness in her chest. "Yeah, the usual." Kyle leaned back, spreading his arms across the booth's backrest. "But bring some extra whipped cream with those pancakes. I like my desserts sweet." The way he looked at her when he said sweet made Martha's skin crawl. Tommy laughed again, that high-pitched hyena sound that set her teeth on edge. "Man, you're killing me tonight." The older one, the one Martha had mentally nicknamed the Suit, because she refused to learn his actual name, hadn't said anything yet. He never did, not at first. He just watched with those cold, evaluating eyes, occasionally checking his expensive watch as if he had somewhere important to be but had chosen to spend his time here instead. That was what frightened Martha most about him. The other two were predictable, loud, obvious. But the Suit had the patience of something that hunted for sport rather than necessity. "I'll get that right in," Martha said, turning to leave. Kyle's hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, he was careful about that. Always careful to stay just on the edge of what could be called playful, but firm enough to stop her, firm enough to remind her that he could. Hold on," he said, his grin widening. "Where's the fire? Sit with us a minute. Take a break." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel every customer's eyes on them. The truckers had stopped eating. The college kid had looked up from his textbooks. Even the cook had paused at the kitchen window. But no one moved. No one said anything. This was the pattern. This was always the pattern. People noticed. People saw. But intervention required courage, and courage could get you hurt. "I can't," Martha said quietly, trying to pull her wrist free. "I have other tables." Kyle's grip tightened just slightly. "1 minute. Come on. We're your best customers, aren't we?" They weren't. They tipped terribly despite ordering for hours. But Martha had learned that facts didn't matter in moments like these. "Let her go." The voice came from booth 7. Emilio hadn't stood up, hadn't raised his voice. But something in the way he spoke made every head in the diner turn. Kyle's grin froze. "Excuse me?" "Let her go," Emilio repeated, same tone, same volume, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than issuing a command. For a moment, nobody moved. The diner held its breath. Then Kyle's face twisted into something uglier. He released Martha's wrist, but only so he could turn his full attention to Emilio. "This your girl or something? She yours?" "She's nobody's," Emilio said quietly. "That's the point you seem to be missing." Tommy's laughter had died. He glanced nervously between Kyle and Emilio, suddenly aware that the energy in the room had shifted into something dangerous. The Suit finally spoke, his voice smooth and controlled. "We're just having fun. No harm meant. Right, sweetheart?" He looked at Martha expectantly, waiting for her to perform the ritual denial, to laugh it off, to say everything was fine so everyone could go back to pretending they hadn't seen anything. Martha's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because across the diner, Emilio was looking at her. Not with pity, not with anger, just acknowledgement. A steady gaze that said, "Tell the truth. I'm here." "It's not fun," Martha heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's never fun." The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Kyle's face flushed red. "What did you just—" "You heard her." Emilio stood up slowly, smoothing his jacket. He didn't walk toward the back booth. Didn't need to. Just standing was enough. Just the promise of movement was enough. The Suit's eyes narrowed, reassessing. His hand moved to Kyle's shoulder, applying pressure. A signal. Not now. Not here. Not with witnesses. "We should probably get going anyway," the Suit said calmly, pulling out his wallet. He dropped 2 20s on the table, less than half what they owed, and stood. Early morning tomorrow. Kyle looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to salvage his wounded pride. But the suit's grip on his shoulder tightened. Let's go. They filed out of the booth, Kyle shooting venomous looks at both Martha and Emilio. Tommy scurried behind them like a kicked dog. The suit paused at the door, looking back one more time, not at Emilio, at Martha. The look said, "This isn't over. You made a choice tonight, and choices have consequences." Then they were gone, the door chiming softly behind them. The diner slowly exhaled. The truckers went back to their food. The college kid returned to his textbooks. The cook disappeared into the kitchen. Within 30 seconds, everyone had returned to the comfortable fiction that nothing significant had happened. Everyone except Martha. She stood frozen in the middle of the diner, her wrist still tingling where Kyle had grabbed her. Her heart was racing, but not entirely from fear. Something else was mixing with the adrenaline, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Emilio sat back down, picking up his coffee like the last 5 minutes hadn't happened. Martha approached his table slowly. Her notepad clutched against her chest like a shield. "Thank you," she whispered. Emilio looked up. "Don't thank me yet." "What do you mean?" His eyes met hers, and for the first time that night, she saw something that looked like regret. "Men like that don't forgive embarrassment," he said quietly. "They'll be back." Martha's hands shook as she poured coffee for the truckers an hour later. The liquid sloshed dangerously close to the rim, and she had to set the pot down to steady herself. "You all right, miss?" the bald trucker asked, genuine concern creasing his weathered face. "Fine," Martha lied, forcing that practiced smile back into place. "Just tired," but she wasn't fine. Emilio's words echoed in her head on an endless loop. "They'll be back." She knew he was right. She'd known it the moment the suit looked at her from the doorway, that cold, calculated promise that this wasn't over. The men had left, but they'd taken something with them. Her illusion of safety, the carefully maintained fiction that if she just kept her head down, smiled through the comments, laughed at the jokes, everything would be manageable. She'd broken the script tonight, and there would be a price for that. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of mechanical movements. Refill coffee, clear tables, wipe counters, smile, repeat. But her mind was elsewhere, cycling through scenarios, each one worse than the last. What if they came back tomorrow? What if they waited for her in the parking lot after her shift? What if they told the manager she'd been rude, cost her this job she desperately needed? What if they found out where she lived? By 4 a.m., the diner had emptied except for the college kid, now asleep with his head on his textbook, and Emilio, who had been nursing the same cup of coffee for hours. He was still there, still watching. Martha approached his booth with the coffee pot, even though his cup was still half full. "Why are you still here?" she asked quietly, too exhausted to maintain professional distance. Emilio looked up from the newspaper he'd been reading. "Making sure you get to your car safely." The simple statement hit Martha harder than it should have. When was the last time someone had thought about her safety? When was the last time anyone had stayed? "You don't have to do that," she whispered. But even as she said it, relief flooded through her. "I know." Martha slid into the booth across from him without asking permission. Her feet ached, her back ached, everything ached. And suddenly she was just too tired to pretend anymore. "They will come back," she said, not as a question but as a fact she was finally accepting. "And when they do, you won't be here." Emilio folded his newspaper carefully. "Probably not." "So what was the point? You made them angry, made me a target, and now, you were already a target." Emilio interrupted gently. "I just made them show it." Martha blinked, thrown by his directness. "Those men come in here every night," Emilio continued. "They push boundaries a little further each time, testing, seeing what they can get away with. How long until one of them follows you home? How long until just fun becomes something you can't walk away from?" Martha's throat tightened, because she'd thought about this. Late at night, lying awake in her tiny apartment, she'd run through these exact scenarios. She'd told herself she was being paranoid, that she was overreacting, that if she just kept managing the situation, it would never escalate. But deep down, she'd known, it always escalated. "I can't quit," Martha said, her voice cracking. "I can't. My mom's in a care facility in Riverside, early onset dementia. She's only 56, and she doesn't even remember my name half the time, but the bills keep coming. $11,000 a month. Insurance covers some, but not enough. Never enough. The words poured out of her like a broken dam. She hadn't meant to tell him any of this. Hadn't meant to explain why she endured the comments, the looks, the hands that lingered too long. But exhaustion had stripped away her filters. I work here 6 nights a week. I clean houses during the day when I can. I drive for a rideshare app on Sundays. And it's still not enough. I'm drowning, and those men know it. They can smell desperation. Martha laughed bitterly. The manager knows too. That's why he looks the other way. Because he knows I can't afford to walk out. Emilio listened without interrupting, his dark eyes steady on her face. And my ex, Martha's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He shows up sometimes. When he needs money. When he's been drinking. When he decides I need to be reminded that I'm nothing without him. Her hand unconsciously moved to her ribs, where the bruises had finally started to fade. He gave you that bruise, Emilio said. Not a question. Martha nodded, unable to meet his eyes. He's why I can't go to the police about those men. Because if I draw any attention to myself, if I make any kind of report, he finds out. And when he finds out, she trailed off, the rest too terrible to say aloud. For a long moment, Emilio said nothing. The ancient clock on the wall ticked steadily. The fluorescent lights hummed. The college kid snored softly in his booth. What's his name? Emilio finally asked. Why? What's his name? Martha hesitated. Something in Emilio's tone made her deeply uneasy. Not afraid of him exactly, but afraid of what he might do with the information. It doesn't matter, she said. There's nothing anyone can do. I just have to. Survive. Keep my head down. Make enough money to cover Mom's bills. Stay invisible. You're not invisible, Emilio said quietly. That's the problem. Martha looked up, confused. People like those men, like your ex, they don't target invisible people. They target the ones who still have something to break, the ones who are still fighting, still surviving. Emilio leaned forward slightly. You think staying quiet keeps you safe. But it doesn't. It just teaches them they can take more. What else am I supposed to do? Martha's voice rose, frustration and fear bleeding through. Fight back? I'm 5'4" and 120 pounds. I'm broke. I'm alone. I have no family except a mother who doesn't know who I am. So please, tell me what exactly are my options here. Emilio held her gaze for a long moment. Then he pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. It was plain white, no company name, just a phone number embossed in black ink. When it gets bad, and it will get bad, you call that number. Who are you? Martha whispered. Someone who understands that some problems can't be solved with police reports and restraining orders. Emilio stood, dropping cash on the table far more than his bill. Get some rest, Martha. And stay aware. Those men will come back to test whether tonight was an anomaly or a new pattern. And if they do? Emilio's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something cold and certain. Then they'll learn the difference between embarrassment and consequence. 3 nights passed. 3 nights of Martha arriving for her shift with Emilio's business card folded in her apron pocket. 3 nights of looking over her shoulder in the parking lot. 3 nights of holding her breath every time the door chimed, expecting to see Kyle's cruel grin or the suit's calculating stare. But they didn't come. The diner returned to its usual rhythm. Truckers, insomniacs, the occasional drunk stumbling in for coffee and regret. The college kid still claimed his corner booth. The cook still moved through his routines with mechanical efficiency. And Martha started to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was over. She should have known better. Friday night brought a cold front that rattled the diner's windows and kept the customers coming. By midnight, every booth was full. The counter seats were occupied. Even the manager had emerged from his office to help bus tables, though he spent most of his time complaining about the workload. Martha moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her feet aching in the worn sneakers she'd worn for 6 months because new ones weren't in the budget. The tips were good tonight. Really good. She'd already made enough to cover most of this week's groceries, maybe even put something toward the pile of bills waiting on her kitchen table. For the first time in weeks, she felt something that almost resembled hope. The door chimed at 12:30. Martha was refilling coffee for an elderly couple when she heard it, and something in her chest clenched before she even turned around. They were back, all 3 of them. Kyle walked in first, his bulk filling the doorway. Tommy followed, that nervous energy radiating off him in waves. The suit came last, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light as he surveyed the crowded diner with obvious displeasure. Their usual booth was occupied by a family parents and two teenagers who'd stopped on their way through town. Martha watched, frozen, as Kyle approached the family's table. "Hey," he said, his voice friendly but his posture anything but. "That's our booth. We need you to move." The father looked up, confused. "I'm sorry. We just ordered." "I don't care. Move." The mother's hand found her husband's arm, squeezing tight. Fear recognition. The understanding that some men don't respond to reason. "We'll just finish our meal and—" Kyle's hand slammed down on the table, making the teenagers jump. "Now!" The manager appeared from nowhere, that practiced smile on his face. The one he used when he wanted to smooth things over without actually solving problems. Gentlemen, he said, guiding Kyle away from the family. "Let me find you another booth. Nice one by the window. Martha will take excellent care of you." Martha's stomach dropped. The manager met her eyes across the diner, and his expression said everything. "Don't make trouble. We need their business. Just do your job." Kyle, Tommy, and the suit settled into a booth near the kitchen. Not their preferred spot, but close enough. And the way they looked at Martha as she approached, smiles too wide, eyes too sharp, made it clear that the 3-day absence hadn't cooled their interest. If anything, it had intensified it. Well, Kyle said as Martha reached their table. "Look who it is. We missed you, sweetheart." Martha pulled out her notepad, her hand trembling slightly. "What can I get you?" "An apology would be nice," Tommy said, that hyena laugh starting up. "You hurt Kyle's feelings last time, made him feel unwelcome." "The usual is fine," the suit interrupted smoothly. He was studying Martha's face, looking for something. Fear, maybe, or regret. Martha wrote down their order, keeping her eyes on the notepad. "I'll get that right in." As she turned to leave, Kyle's voice followed her. "Hey, where's your boyfriend? The one in the fancy suit?" Martha kept walking, but her shoulders tensed. "That's what I thought," Kyle called out, louder now. Loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Big man makes a scene, then disappears. Leaves you here all alone. That's what heroes do, right?" Laughter from Tommy. Silence from everyone else. The next 2 hours were torture. Every time Martha passed their booth, Kyle found new ways to make her uncomfortable. Compliments that felt like threats. Questions that demanded personal answers. His leg stretched out into the aisle, so she had to step over it, or around it, or ask him to move, which he did slowly, mockingly, making a show of his cooperation. Tommy kept up a running commentary, narrating Martha's movements like a sports announcer. "And there she goes, folks. Look at that hustle, that dedication." The suit said little, but his silence was worse. He watched, waited, occasionally checking his watch as if he had a schedule, a plan that Martha wasn't privy to. The other customers pretended not to notice. The manager stayed in his office. The cook kept his head down. This was the pattern. This was always the pattern. Around 2:30, the diner started to empty. The family had left hours ago. The elderly couple had paid and gone. Even the truckers had finished their meal and hit the road. Soon it was just Martha, the college kid asleep in his corner, the cook, and the 3 men. And that's when everything changed. Kyle stood up as Martha passed, blocking her path to the kitchen. "Excuse me," Martha said quietly, trying to step around him. He moved with her, maintaining the blockade. "Where you going? We're not done talking. I have other tables." "No, you don't." Kyle gestured at the empty diner. "It's just us, so why don't you stop being such a bitch and sit down for a minute?" The word hung in the air like a slap. Martha's face flushed. "I need to get back to work." "I think you need to learn some manners." Kyle's hand reached out, not for her wrist this time, for her face. His fingers brushed her jaw, tilting her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "See? That's better. Now we can talk like, get your hand off her." The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Emilio Rojas stood just inside the diner, snowflakes melting on his dark jacket. His hair was slightly disheveled from the wind, and there was something different about his expression tonight, something that made the temperature in the room plummet. He wasn't here to watch anymore. Kyle's hand dropped from Martha's face, but his posture remained aggressive. "You again. What, you stalking her or something?" Emilio didn't answer. He just walked forward, each step measured and deliberate, until he was standing directly in front of Kyle. Close enough that Kyle had to choose, step back, or stand his ground. Kyle chose wrong. "I asked you a question," he said, puffing out his chest. Emilio's hand moved with startling speed, not striking, not threatening, just reaching out to take Martha's jaw in his hand, the same way Kyle had moments before. But there was nothing aggressive in the gesture. Nothing possessive. It was gentle, deliberate, a statement. Time seemed to slow as Emilio's hand cupped Martha's jaw. Not roughly, not with the claiming entitlement Kyle had shown, but with a controlled gentleness that was somehow more commanding than any show of force could have been. He tilted her face slightly, angling it toward the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. The bruise beneath her eye, now faded to a sickly yellow-green, became impossible to ignore under that brightness. Every person in the diner could see it clearly now. The shape of it, the age of it, the story it told. Martha's breath caught in her throat. She should pull away, should say something, but Emilio's dark eyes held hers with an intensity that pinned her in place. "Look at her," Emilio said quietly. The words weren't loud, weren't shouted, but something in his tone made them impossible to ignore. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. "Man, what the hell are you?" "Look at her." Emilio's voice dropped even lower, each word precise and measured. "Really look at what you've been doing, at what you think is funny." The diner had gone completely silent. The hum of the refrigerators, the tick of the old clock. Even the college kid had woken up, watching with wide, frightened eyes. Tommy had stopped laughing. His knee bounced frantically under the table, nervous energy seeking an outlet. The suit leaned back in the booth, his expression carefully neutral, but his hand had moved to his pocket, calculating, assessing whether this situation required intervention. Emilio's thumb brushed gently across the bruise on Martha's face. Not enough to hurt, just enough to draw every eye in the room to it. "This is what you've been terrorizing," he continued, still in that deadly quiet voice. "A woman working 2 jobs to pay for her mother's care. A woman who comes here every night because she has no other choice. And you—" His eyes shifted to Kyle. "You saw that desperation and thought it made her yours to torment." "We were just having fun," Tommy blurted out. "We didn't mean—" "Fun." Emilio's jaw tightened. His hand finally dropped from Martha's face, but he didn't step back, didn't give Kyle room to breathe. "Tell me something. When you grab her, when you corner her, when you make comments about her body, her smile, what you'd like to do to her, does she laugh?" Kyle's face flushed red. "Listen, man, does she laugh?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Martha stood frozen between them, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She wanted to run, wanted to hide, wanted to disappear into the floor, but Emilio's presence beside her felt like gravity, inescapable, and somehow steadying. "She smiles," Kyle said defensively. "She's friendly. We tip her. She smiles because she's afraid of what happens if she doesn't." Emilio took a single step forward. Kyle instinctively stepped back. "She's friendly because men like you punish women who aren't. And your tips?" A humorless smile touched Emilio's lips. "You leave $20 after ordering $60 worth of food and occupying her station for 4 hours. That's not generosity. That's payment for the privilege of harassment." The suit finally spoke, his voice smooth and controlled. "I think you're overreacting. This is just a misunderstanding." "No." Emilio turned his gaze to the older man, and something in his expression made the suit's carefully maintained composure crack slightly. "This is you thinking you're untouchable. Thinking that because you wear expensive watches and speak politely, your cruelty is somehow refined, civilized." Emilio's hand moved to his jacket, and for a moment, everyone tensed, but he only pulled out his wallet. He extracted several bills, hundreds, by the look of them, and placed them carefully on the table in front of the suit. "That's for tonight, for every night you've been here." Emilio's voice remained quiet, but it carried through the diner like thunder. "Consider it payment, for services rendered, for the entertainment you've extracted from making a vulnerable woman afraid." The suit stared at the money, his face darkening. "Take it," Emilio continued, "because that's the last time you'll ever step foot in this diner. The last time you'll look at her. The last time you'll speak to her." Kyle found his courage somewhere in his humiliation. "You can't tell us where we can and can't." Emilio's hand shot out, not striking, but gripping Kyle's shoulder with enough force to make the bigger man wince. "This is me being polite," Emilio said, and for the first time, something dangerous flickered in his voice, something that suggested he had been restraining himself all along, and that restraint had limits. "This is me giving you a chance to walk away with nothing more than embarrassment. Do you understand what I'm offering you?" Kyle's bravado crumbled. Up close, with Emilio's hand on his shoulder and those cold, certain eyes boring into him. He finally understood. This wasn't a customer. This wasn't someone who would back down or be intimidated. This was something else entirely. "Yeah," Kyle mumbled. "Yeah, I understand." "Good." Emilio released him, smoothing the wrinkled fabric of Kyle's shirt with casual precision. "Then leave." Tommy was already sliding out of the booth, eager to escape. Kyle followed, his face flushed with shame and suppressed rage. The suit remained seated for a moment longer, his eyes locked on Emilio. "Do you have any idea who you're threatening?" he asked quietly. Emilio smiled. It wasn't warm. "Do you?" Something passed between them. A recognition. An understanding of territory and consequence. The suit stood slowly, leaving the money on the table. "This isn't over." "Yes," Emilio said simply. "It is." The three men walked toward the door, Kyle's fists clenched, Tommy practically running, the suit maintaining his composure until the very end. At the doorway, the suit paused and looked back, not at Emilio. At Martha, one last attempt at intimidation. One last promise that she would pay for this, but Emilio stepped into his line of sight, blocking the view entirely. The message was clear. Not anymore. The door chimed as they left. The cold night air rushed in briefly before the door swung shut. And then, silence. Complete, absolute silence. The college kid stared with his mouth slightly open. The cook had emerged from the kitchen, frozen in place. The manager had appeared in his office doorway but hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't done anything. Martha stood in the middle of the diner, trembling. Not from fear. From something else. Something that felt like pressure releasing after being held too long. Like breathing after drowning. "Martha." Emilio's voice was gentle now, the cold authority gone. "Are you all right?" She wanted to answer. Wanted to thank him. Wanted to ask who he was, how he'd known to come back tonight, what he'd just done, but all that came out was a choked sob. And then she was crying, really crying for the first time in months. All the fear, all the exhaustion, all the nights of swallowing her dignity and her safety just to survive. It poured out of her in gasping, shaking waves. Emilio didn't touch her, didn't offer empty comfort. He just stood there, a steady presence. While Martha finally let herself break, the diner remained silent. The days after that night passed in a strange, suspended silence. Martha showed up for her shift Saturday evening expecting everything to have changed, but the diner looked exactly the same. Same flickering neon sign outside, same cracked vinyl booths inside, same burnt coffee smell mixed with grease and old dreams. But something fundamental had shifted. The manager avoided her eyes when she clocked in. Didn't make his usual comments about her being late, even though she was 5 minutes early. Didn't remind her about smiling more or moving faster. He just nodded and retreated to his office like he'd suddenly remembered she was more than a function. The cook, a man named Frank who'd worked there for 15 years and had never spoken more than 3 words to her, handed her a fresh pot of coffee and said quietly, "About time someone did something." Then he returned to his grill, and that was that. The back booth remained empty all night. And the night after that, and the night after that. By Tuesday, Martha started to believe that maybe Emilio had been right. Maybe they really were gone. The thought should have brought relief, but instead, it left her with an unsettling sense of waiting, like the silence before thunder. She hadn't seen Emilio since Friday night. After she'd stopped crying, standing in the middle of the diner like a broken dam, he'd guided her to a booth and made her sit down. Brought her water, told the manager she was taking a break and that it wasn't a suggestion. Then he'd left without asking for thanks or explanations. Just walked out into the cold night like he'd completed some task he'd set for himself. The business card was still in Martha's apron pocket. She touched it sometimes during her shifts, feeling the embossed numbers, wondering who he really was and why he'd decided her safety was worth his intervention. Wednesday afternoon, Martha returned home from her day job, cleaning houses, to find an envelope wedged in her apartment door. No return address, no markings, just her name written in precise, business-like handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $15,000. Martha stared at it, certain she was hallucinating. She blinked, looked away, looked back. The check was still there. A small note accompanied it, written in the same precise handwriting. "For your mother's care. This isn't charity. This is correction of an imbalance. You've paid enough." No signature. Martha sank onto her threadbare couch, the check clutched in her shaking hands. $15,000. 3 months of her mother's care, maybe 4 if she was careful. 3 months where she could breathe, could sleep, could work 1 job instead of 3. She should feel grateful, relieved. Instead, she felt terrified, because people didn't just give away $15,000. People didn't intervene in strangers' lives without wanting something in return. And men like Emilio, men with that kind of control, that kind of authority, they always collected their debts eventually. Martha grabbed her phone, pulling out the business card. She stared at the number for a long moment before dialing. It rang once, twice. Martha. Emilio's voice was calm, unsurprised, as if he'd been expecting her call. "I can't accept this," she said immediately. "You can. I don't even know you. I don't know what you want. I don't want anything. People don't just—" Martha's voice cracked. "Nobody does this. Nobody helps without wanting something back. So what is it? What do you want from me?" Silence on the other end. "Not uncomfortable, thoughtful. When I was 17, Emilio said finally. "My sister worked at a restaurant in East Los Angeles. She was 19, beautiful, trying to save money for college. There was a man who came in, said things to her, did things, small things at first. The kind of things people told her to ignore." Martha's grip tightened on the phone. She ignored them. Emilio continued, his voice carefully neutral. "Because she needed the job. Because she was told not to make trouble. Because she believed if she just kept her head down, it would stop." What happened? He followed her home one night. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. "She survived," Emilio said quietly. "Barely. But the woman who came home from the hospital wasn't my sister anymore. She was someone fear had hollowed out and reconstructed. She never went back to school. Never trusted anyone enough to get close again. She's alive, but she's not living," Martha finished softly. "No," Martha's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just understand. I couldn't help her because I was a kid who didn't know what I was seeing until it was too late. But I'm not that kid anymore. And when I see the same pattern starting," he paused, "I stop it. The money isn't about you owing me. It's about you having options. Choice. The ability to walk away from situations that put you in danger. That's all." Emilio's voice softened slightly. "You don't have to trust me, Martha. You don't have to like me. But you do have to cash that check and take care of your mother. Because that's what you've been trying to do all along, and you deserve help doing it." Martha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Those men, the ones from the diner, where are they?" Another pause. "Gone. Gone where? Does it matter?" "Yes," Martha said firmly. "It matters. Because if you hurt them, if you did something illegal, then I'm part of that. And I need to know. No one got hurt?" Emilio said. "Not physically. But they learned that their behavior has consequences. That there are people watching. That invisibility isn't the same as being untouchable." "That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I can give you." Martha stared at the check in her hand. $15,000. Safety. Time. The ability to breathe without drowning. "What are you?" she asked quietly. "Really?" "Someone who understands that the systems we're supposed to trust don't always protect the people who need it most. So I do what those systems can't, or won't. That's vigilante justice. That's practical mercy." Martha stood, walking to her window. Outside, the sun was setting over the shabby apartment complex, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. How many other people in this building were drowning like she had been? How many were one emergency away from complete collapse? "The suit, the older man, he said it wasn't over," Martha said. "He looked at me like he was making a promise." He was. And now? Now he understands that some promises are too expensive to keep. "You threatened him. I educated him." Despite everything, the fear, the confusion, the moral complexity of what Emilio represented, Martha almost smiled. What if he doesn't stay educated? What if they come back? They won't. Emilio's certainty was absolute. "But if I'm wrong, you have my number." "And Martha?" "Yes? You didn't break by speaking up Friday night. You were already broken by staying silent. All you did was start healing." The call ended before Martha could respond. She stood by the window for a long time, watching the sunset fade to darkness, the check still clutched in her hand. Emilio was right about one thing. She had been broken, shattered by fear and necessity, and the slow erosion of believing she deserved better. But something had changed Friday night. Not when Emilio intervened. When she'd said, "It's not fun. It's never fun." When she'd finally told the truth out loud. That was when the breaking had stopped, and the healing had begun. Martha deposited the check Thursday morning. The bank teller had looked at the amount, then at Martha's worn jacket and tired eyes, and asked 3 times if she was sure it was legitimate. Martha had simply nodded, watching as $15,000 transformed from paper to numbers on a screen. Real, tangible, impossible. She called the care facility from the bank parking lot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "I can pay," she told the billing coordinator. 3 months, maybe 4. "I can pay." The woman on the other end had congratulated her warmly, professionally, not knowing that those words represented the difference between Martha's mother having care and being transferred to a state facility where dignity went to die. Martha sat in her car for 20 minutes after the call ended, just breathing. That night, she arrived at the diner early. The manager was restocking supplies when she walked in, and he actually looked up from his clipboard. "You're here," he said, as if her reliability had suddenly become noteworthy. "I'm always here." He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "About Friday night, those men. I should have—" "Yes," Martha interrupted quietly. "You should have." The manager's face reddened. "I was trying to avoid trouble. For everyone. You understand." "I understand that trouble was already here. You just didn't want to see it because addressing it would have been inconvenient." Martha tied her apron, her movements precise and controlled. "But I also understand that I need this job, so we're going to move forward. And if anyone treats me or any other server the way those men did, you're going to handle it. Immediately. Not later. Not with excuses. Immediately." The manager opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. It wasn't an apology. But it was acknowledgement. Martha would take it. The shift passed quietly. Regular customers. Normal orders. The back booth remained empty, and every hour it stayed that way. Martha felt something inside her chest loosen slightly. Around 11, the door chimed. Martha looked up automatically, and her breath caught. Emilio walked in, dressed differently than before. Dark jeans instead of dress pants. A simple black jacket instead of the suit. He looked almost ordinary if you ignored the tattoos on his neck and the way he moved through space like he owned it. He chose booth 7 again. His booth, apparently. Martha approached with coffee and a menu, trying to calm her racing heart. "You didn't have to come back," she said quietly as she poured. "I know. Are you checking on me?" Emilio's eyes met hers. "I'm having coffee. You happen to work here." Despite herself, Martha smiled slightly. "Right. Coffee. At 11 p.m. on a Thursday. I keep unusual hours." She set the pot down. "Thank you. For the check. For everything. I don't know how I'll ever—" "You won't." Emilio interrupted gently. "That's the point. This wasn't a transaction, Martha. It was just balance, balance," she repeated. "The world takes from people like you, people who are trying, who are surviving, who deserve better. Sometimes it needs to give back." He glanced at the menu without really seeing it. "I just helped facilitate that." Martha slid into the booth across from him without asking. Her manager would probably disapprove, but something told her he wouldn't say anything this time. "Who are you?" she asked. "Really?" Emilio was quiet for a moment. "Does it matter?" "Yes, because you're in my life now. You've changed things. And I don't even know your last name. Rojas. Emilio Rojas. What do you do, Emilio Rojas?" He smiled slightly. "I solve problems." "That's vague." Intentionally. Martha studied his face, the sharp angles, the controlled expressions, the eyes that saw too much. "Those men. Kyle, Tommy, the one with the watch. What did you really do to them?" "I had conversations. Just conversations. Productive conversations." Martha leaned forward. "I need to know I'm not part of something criminal, that I didn't benefit from someone getting hurt." Emilio's expression softened slightly. Kyle lost his job at his father's construction company. Turns out when certain information reaches certain people about workplace harassment, consequences follow. Tommy's probation officer received an anonymous tip about parole violations. Nothing violent, just facts reaching people who could act on them. And the suit? His real name is Gerald Kramer. He owns 3 businesses in this county. All of them are now under audit by the State Tax Commission. Emilio's smile was cold. Sometimes the most effective punishment is simply ensuring people face the consequences they've been avoiding. You destroyed their lives. No, I removed their ability to destroy others. Emilio's voice was firm. Those men made choices, for years probably, hurting people, intimidating them, believing their money or connections made them immune. I just ensured the immunity expired. Martha sat back, processing. That's not how the system is supposed to work. The system wasn't working. For you. For countless others. Emilio met her eyes steadily. I'm not a good man, Martha. I won't pretend to be. But I'm useful. And sometimes usefulness matters more than goodness. They sat in silence for a moment, the diner humming around them. My ex, Martha said suddenly. The one who gave me the bruise. He showed up yesterday. Outside my apartment. Emilio's entire demeanor changed. The casual posture vanished, replaced by focused intensity. Did he touch you? No. He just stood there, watching, making sure I knew he could find me whenever he wanted. What's his name? Martha hesitated. This was the line. Once she crossed it, there was no going back. His name, Emilio repeated quietly. Brandon Wells. Emilio pulled out his phone, typing quickly. Address? Martha gave it to him, the words feeling like both betrayal and liberation. He won't bother you again, Emilio said simply. You can't just... I can. And I will. He looked up from his phone. You've carried this alone long enough. The following week, Martha's life began to transform in ways both subtle and profound. Brandon stopped appearing outside her apartment, stopped calling from blocked numbers at 3 a.m., stopped sending messages that oscillated between apologies and threats. He simply vanished from her life as completely as if he'd never existed. Martha didn't ask Emilio what he'd done, partly because she was afraid of the answer, mostly because the relief of finally being able to sleep without fear was too precious to complicate with moral questions. She used the money to pay her mother's care facility through March. Then she quit her weekend rideshare job, quit cleaning houses on Tuesday afternoons. For the first time in 2 years, she had time to breathe. The diner felt different now, too. The manager had hired a second server for the graveyard shift, a young woman named Isabel who'd moved to town escaping her own demons. On Isabel's first night, a customer made a comment about her accent, his tone dripping with disdain. Martha was at his table before he'd finished speaking. That's inappropriate, she said firmly, not loudly, but with absolute conviction. Apologize or leave. The customer had blustered, looked around for support, found none. The manager had emerged from his office, actually emerged and backed Martha up. The man left. Isabel had looked at Martha with wide, grateful eyes. You didn't have to. Yes, Martha interrupted gently. I did. Because she'd learned something in the weeks since Emilio had intervened. Silence wasn't safety. Silence was complicity, and she was done being complicit in her own diminishment. Emilio continued coming to the diner twice a week. Always booth 7. Always late evening. They'd talk, sometimes brief conversations about nothing important. Other times he'd just read his newspaper while Martha worked, a quiet presence that felt like protection without obligation. She'd tried to return his money once, had brought a check to the diner, carefully made out for $15,000. Emilio had looked at it, smiled slightly, and torn it in half. I don't take back gifts, he'd said simply. It's too much. It's exactly enough. His eyes had met hers with that steady intensity. You're not in debt, Martha. You're free. Learn the difference. One night in late January, a new customer came in. Well-dressed, handsome, friendly. He sat at the counter and made pleasant conversation while Martha worked. Asked about her day, laughed at her jokes, left a generous tip. When he asked for her number, his smile was warm and genuine. Martha felt the familiar flutter of possibility, the thought that maybe she could have something normal, something good. But then she noticed the way his eyes tracked her movements when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his friendly questions were slowly, subtly becoming more personal, the way his hand had accidentally brushed hers 3 times while she poured coffee. A year ago, she would have ignored these signs, would have told herself she was being paranoid, would have given him her number because saying no felt dangerous. Now she simply said, I'm not interested, but thank you. His smile faltered. Come on, I'm just being friendly. I know, and I'm grateful. But the answer is still no. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, confusion. Then a flash of irritation quickly suppressed. He left shortly after, and Martha felt something shift inside her chest. She'd said no, and the world hadn't ended. From booth 7, Emilio caught her eye. He didn't smile, didn't nod approvingly, just held her gaze for a moment, an acknowledgement that she'd crossed some invisible threshold. That night, as Martha cleaned up after her shift, Isabel approached her hesitantly. Can I ask you something? The younger woman said. That man, the one in booth 7, is he your boyfriend? Brother? Martha paused, considering. He's a friend, I think. He watches you, not in a creepy way. Isabel searched for words. In a guardian way, like he's making sure nothing bad happens. Yeah, Martha said softly. That's exactly what he does. Must be nice, having someone like that. Martha looked across the diner at Emilio, who was reading his paper, seemingly oblivious to their conversation but probably aware of every word. It is, she admitted. But I'm learning that I can be that person too. For myself, for others. Isabel smiled. You already are. You stood up for me. No one's done that before. The words settled into Martha's chest like warmth. Because Isabel was right. She'd stood up. She'd spoken out. She'd become the person she'd needed someone to be for her. The transformation wasn't complete. Some nights she still flinched when men raised their voices. Still caught herself making herself smaller, quieter, less. Still woke up from nightmares where Brandon found her, or Kyle cornered her, or the suit made good on his promise. But those moments were becoming less frequent. And in between them, Martha was discovering something she'd forgotten. Her own strength. She'd always been strong. Had to be. To survive what she'd survived. But survival, strength, and living strength were different things. One was about endurance. The other was about choice. She was learning to choose. At the end of her shift, Emilio left his usual generous tip and stood to go. Same time Thursday? Martha asked. Probably. You don't have to keep checking on me. I'm okay now. Emilio paused at the door, looking back. I know. But the coffee's good, and the company's better. Then he was gone, disappearing into the cold night. Martha stood in the empty diner, Isabel humming softly as she wiped down tables, and smiled. She was okay now. Not fixed. Not healed completely, but okay. And okay was a start. February brought rain that hammered against the diner's windows and kept the late-night crowd sparse. Martha didn't mind. The quiet shifts gave her time to think, to process, to fully inhabit the person she was becoming. Thursday evening arrived with the usual storm. Martha was brewing fresh coffee when the door chimed at 8 p.m. earlier than Emilio usually appeared. But it wasn't Emilio. A woman walked in, maybe 60, with steel-gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much. She wore a simple coat and carried herself with quiet dignity. She sat at the counter, and Martha approached with a menu and a smile that was real now, not practiced. Coffee? Martha asked. Please. The woman's voice was soft, measured. And maybe a moment of your time, if you're not too busy. Martha glanced around the empty diner. I've got time. As she poured coffee, the woman said, My name is Rosa. Rosa Rojas. Martha's hand stilled. Rojas. Emilio's mother. The words hung between them. Martha set the pot down carefully, her mind racing. He doesn't know I'm here, Rosa continued. He'd probably be angry if he did. My son has always preferred to do his kindness in shadows. Why are you here? Rosa smiled, sad and proud simultaneously. To tell you something he won't, to give you context he'd never offer. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup. You remind him of his sister, not in appearance, in circumstance. In that quiet desperation of someone who's been told to accept what's unacceptable. Martha slid onto the stool beside her. He told me about her. What happened? Did he tell you what it did to him? How he blamed himself for not seeing, not stopping it? Rosa's eyes glistened. My son built an empire from nothing. Built it on violence and control, and all the things mothers pray their children never become. But he built it for a reason. To protect people. To stop what happened to Elena from happening to anyone else. At least, anyone he could reach. Rosa took a sip of coffee. He's not a good man by most definitions. But he's a necessary one. And the people he helps, people like you, they're his redemption. I don't need him to protect me anymore, Martha said softly. I know. He knows too. That's why what he did matters. Rosa met Martha's eyes. He didn't save you. You saved yourself. He just removed the obstacles preventing you from doing so. That's what he does. Create space for people to find their own strength. Martha felt tears prickling her eyes. I don't know how to thank him. You already have. By surviving, by thriving, by standing up for that young woman you hired. Rosa smiled. He watches, you know. Makes sure the pattern holds. Makes sure the safety continues. That's his nature. Will he keep coming here? For a while. Until he's certain you don't need the reminder that someone's watching. Then he'll fade back into shadows. That's his way. Rosa stood, leaving money on the counter. But knowing someone like my son exists, someone who understands that mercy sometimes requires force that changes you, changes how you move through the world. It already has. Rosa touched Martha's hand gently. Good. Because the world needs women like you. Women who've been broken and learned to rebuild themselves stronger than before. Women who remember what it felt like to need help and make sure others receive it. After Rosa left, Martha stood alone in the quiet diner, rain drumming steadily against the windows. Emilio arrived an hour later, shaking water from his jacket. "You're late," Martha said, pouring his coffee. "Traffic. Your mother came by." Emilio's hand froze halfway to his cup. "Did she?" "She told me about Elena, about you, about why you do what you do. She talks too much. She's proud of you, worried about you, both at the same time." Emilio sighed, a rare break in his controlled demeanor. "I'm sorry if she—" "Don't," Martha cut him off. "Don't apologize. She helped me understand something important." "What's that?" "That silence can mean different things. The silence I lived in before that was erasure, invisibility. But the silence you create? That's space. Room to breathe, to heal, to become." Emilio studied her face. "You're different." "I'm myself. Maybe for the first time in years." They sat in comfortable, quiet. The storm outside a distant soundtrack. "I won't be able to come as often," Emilio said eventually. "There are other situations, other people who need space," Martha finished. "I know, and that's okay, because you were right. I'm not in debt to you. I'm just grateful, and I'll carry that forward. For others who need what you gave me, which was—" Martha smiled. "Permission to stop accepting the unacceptable, and the safety to do something about it." Emilio stood to leave, dropping his usual tip, still generous, still understated. At the door, he paused. "Martha?" "Yes?" "You were never weak. You were never broken. You were just tired." His dark eyes held hers. "Don't forget that." Then he walked out into the rain, and Martha knew she might not see him again for a while. Maybe ever. But that was okay, because the space Emilio Rojas had created through intervention, through protection, through his quiet, uncompromising refusal to let cruelty go unchallenged, that space remained. And Martha would guard it fiercely, for herself, for Isabel, for every person who walked through the diner's doors carrying wounds they'd been told to hide. The rain continued. The coffee brewed. The night stretched ahead. And Martha Gidney, waitress, survivor, guardian of her own dignity, smiled. Because she was free, not because someone had saved her, but because someone had believed she was worth saving, and in learning to believe it herself, she'd become unbreakable. Thanks for staying with this story, right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.